The winter sun had barely climbed over the ridge when the first sign of trouble showed itself on the dusty trail leading to the ranch. Folks in those parts had learned to trust the wind, the ground, and even the silence. But that morning, the silence felt heavy, almost warning. And in the middle of that uneasy calm stood a young woman with a steady gaze and a heart that had carried more storms than she ever admitted. She clutched her shawl tight around her shoulders as the cold breeze pressed against her, but it wasn't the wind she feared. It was the man riding hard toward her family's land, the same man who had made it clear that her life was his to decide. Her brother, known for his ruthless ways, had made promises to powerful folks in town, promises that placed her future in the hands of strangers. And she knew he would not break his word for anything. Not even her tears. Most people in that old American frontier knew her brother by the name Colt. He was a man who carried trouble like a badge. A man who thought fear was the strongest kind of respect. But the land had a strange way of bringing balance. And balance came that morning in the form of hoofbeats echoing from the far side of the valley. They were not the hoofbeats of Colt and his men. These beats were deeper, steadier, powerful in a way that made the air shift. She heard them before she saw him, the Apache warrior who had crossed paths with her once. The warrior whose steady eyes had lingered on her longer than she understood. The warrior who carried honor in every move. She had not known his name that first day by the river, when he helped her gather the wood that had slipped down the bank. He had said little, only nodded, yet something in the way he moved made her feel safe in a world where safety was rare. Over the weeks, she had seen him from afar, always traveling with a quiet purpose, always watching the land as if it breathed truths only he could hear. And though she kept her distance, something inside her trusted him in a way she had never trusted any man. But trust was a dangerous thing when someone like Colt held power over her life. Colt had made a deal with a trader who wanted labor for a far-off territory, and Colt saw an advantage. He believed sending his sister away would profit him, and he planned it without a hint of guilt. She had pleaded, argued, even stood her ground with everything she had, yet none of it softened the man who claimed to know what was best for their family. Colt believed strength meant control, and he intended to prove it by sunrise. She stood on the porch that morning, watching him ride closer, wondering how she would escape the path he had chosen for her, just when she thought the day could not twist tighter. The soft rumble of the second rider grew louder. She turned toward the ridge, her breath catching as the tall figure appeared over the crest. His horse moved with a confidence that belonged only to warriors born under wide skies. The blanket across the saddle, the feathers tied in his braid, the hard-set determination in his posture, she recognized him at once. The Apache warrior she had only seen in fleeting moments was headed straight toward her ranch. Riding as though he already knew a fight waited for him there, the two horses drew closer from opposite directions. She stood frozen between them, her heart trembling in ways she did not fully understand. Colt reached her first, pulling his horse to a hard stop, dust rising around his boots. His glare cut through her, sharp and cold. "You're ready," he said, more command than question. "Get your things. The trader leaves today, and you're going with him." Her voice nearly failed her, but she forced herself to speak. "I am not going." Colt leaned down from his saddle, his tone tightening. "You don't get to choose. Your family, and I decide what happens here." She opened her mouth to answer, but another sound thundered behind her. Colt turned sharply, annoyance twisting into confusion when he saw the warrior riding in. The Apache slowed only when he reached the open space near the well, though his eyes locked on Colt with a steady heat that warned of trouble. Even from several yards away, his presence changed the air. Colt scoffed under his breath. "What does he want here?" The woman could not speak. Her pulse felt too loud in her ears. The Apache dismounted with a quiet strength, his boots pressing into the earth like he claimed it under his steps. He did not look at her first, though she felt his awareness wrap around her like a shield. Instead, he faced Colt, standing tall, shoulders squared. As if prepared for whatever storm the rancher intended to start, Colt swung his leg off the saddle and marched toward him, trying to match the warrior's presence with force of his own. "You're far from your own land," Colt said. State your purpose and move on. The Apache did not flinch. He looked from Colt to the woman and then back to Colt, his jaw tightening in a way that showed he had chosen his side long before this moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried calm strength, the kind that silenced wind and anger alike. "She belongs with me." The woman felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Colt froze mid-step, disbelief washing over him. The ranch hands standing near the barn exchanged uneasy glances. No one had ever spoken to Colt that way, not out in town, not in the valley, not on his own land. And no Apache had ever claimed anything, or anyone, in front of him. Colt let out a low, dangerous laugh. "She belongs with you? You think you can ride in here and say something like that?" He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "She isn't yours, and she won't ever be." The Apache held his ground, his eyes blazing with steady fire. "I do not take what is not mine," he said. "But I protect what wrong men try to use." Colt's jaw twitched. His temper was a wildfire waiting for a spark. "You're outnumbered on my land," he warned. The warrior lifted his chin, not intimidated. "Then your land will remember today." The woman felt her breath tremble as both men stared each other down, the cold morning thick with danger. She stepped forward, but her voice caught in her throat when Colt raised a hand to silence her before she could try again. The Apache spoke directly to her for the first time since he arrived, his voice steady and sure. "You choose where you stand?" Colt snapped his glare toward her. "Don't even think about it." Her heart pounded, torn between fear and the strange sense of safety she felt whenever the Apache was near. Snow clouds shifted overhead, the wind rising as if the land itself listened. Both men waited for her answer, one fueled by control, the other by honor. And as the silence deepened, she realized the next words she spoke would change everything, for her, for Colt, and for the warrior who had just risked everything by claiming her. In front of the entire ranch. She opened her mouth to speak, but before a single word escaped, another rider appeared on the horizon, racing toward them with news that would shake the valley even harder than the claim the warrior had just made. The stranger on the distant ridge pushed his horse hard, kicking up long streaks of dust that floated across the cold morning air. His posture alone told everyone that whatever news he carried wasn't small or simple. Even Colt's glare shifted, not softening but sliding into a sharp, cautious focus. The Apache warrior watched without moving a muscle, though something in his expression tightened, as if he already expected trouble was riding their way. The woman felt her throat dry as she stepped back instinctively, torn between the two men already ready to clash and the unknown message coming fast toward them. The ranch hands drifted closer, drawn by the strange pull of the moment, their boots crunching lightly over frozen dirt. The whole yard seemed to hold one long breath. When the rider finally reached the front of the ranch, his horse stumbled to a halt, panting steam into the cold. The man on its back reeve, a nearby rancher known for honesty and quick judgment, looked pale beneath the dust coating his face. He pointed toward the valley without even climbing down. "They're coming," he said, breathless. "And you've got trouble heading straight for your land." Colt's jaw worked side to side, impatience rising fast. "Who's coming?" he demanded. Reeve swallowed. "Rennick's men." A ripple of unease moved through the ranch hands. Rennick was known across the region as a man who thrived on chaos. He was a traitor, yes, but one who crossed lines even Colt avoided. He wanted what he wanted, and he took it through fear, not law. And the worst part was clear: Rennick never came alone. He came with men who did not care for reason. "He's got a claim on her," Reeve added, nodding toward the woman. "Says Colt sold her place to him. Says she's going with him one way or another." The woman felt a cold shock run through her. She had known her brother had plans for her, but she never imagined him dealing with Rennick. Her heart staggered at the thought. Rennick wasn't a simple traitor. He trafficked in misery. The Apache warrior's eyes narrowed at the news, his attention shifting from Colt to her, then back to Reeve. Colt lifted his chin. "I made a deal," he said flatly, as if the truth didn't sting him. "And that deal stands." Reeve opened a hand helplessly. "They'll be here within the hour." Silence settled, thicker than before. Cold wind scraped against the wooden porch rails. The woman wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but from the force of fear sliding into her chest. She tried to speak, but her voice felt trapped inside. The Apache warrior stepped forward, his presence growing stronger, more unyielding. "She will not be taken," he said, tone steady. "Not by you, not by this man you named." Colt bristled. "You think you can stand between me and what I decide?" He snapped. "Between me and my business?" The warrior held his gaze without blinking. "I stand where she needs someone to stand." Those words hit her harder than the cold wind ever could. It wasn't a claim made from ownership or pride. It was spoken from a place of honor, of choice, of something she had rarely been given, someone willing to protect her simply because her safety mattered. Colt took a threatening step forward. "Then you're making a mistake you won't walk away from." Before either man could come closer, Reeve raised both hands sharply. "Argue later," he said. "Rennick's men are armed, riding fast, and they've already got the lower pass blocked. If you stay here fighting among yourselves, you won't have a chance when they arrive." Colt shot him a rough look, but deep down he knew Reeve didn't exaggerate. Rennick's gang moved like wolves when they wanted something, and they were mean enough to burn a ranch to the ground just to prove a point. The warrior turned slightly toward the woman, not touching her but making it clear he was ready to defend her if anyone dared step too close. His horse stamped the frozen ground behind him, sensing the tension. "You brought this trouble," Colt growled at her. "You're the reason they're coming here." She shook her head, her voice finally breaking through. "You sold me to them. You made this deal. I begged you to stop." "That's enough," Colt snapped. "I did what I had to do." Reeve cut in again, urgent. "Colt, you didn't just make a deal. Rennick says you owe him double now. He claims you hit her when she refused to go. He's angry, and he's bringing men who want to fight more than a payoff." Colt's expression changed for the first time, just for a moment, to something that looked like fear. But it vanished just as fast, replaced by the same stubborn pride he always wore. The Apache warrior watched Colt closely. "Your choices brought danger," he said. "And now you hide behind anger to cover guilt." Colt's hands balled into fists. "I don't hide from anyone." But the woman saw it, just a flicker, the truth he refused to speak. He had made a deal out of desperation, not greed. Their family ranch had been falling apart. Supplies were low. Debt was high. And Colt, in all his harshness, believed there was no other way to keep their land from being taken. He made a terrible choice, but a choice born from fear, not hatred. Still, the choice placed her in the hands of a vicious man, and now that man was riding straight toward them. Reeve finally climbed down from his horse, every movement quick with worry. "You've got 1 hour, maybe less. You need a plan." Colt pressed a hand to his forehead, thinking fast. "We can hide her," he muttered. "Get her into the cellar." "No," the warrior said, his voice a firm wall. Colt spun. "She stays safe on my land, under my roof." The warrior stepped between them with unshaken calm. "Your roof is where his men will ride first. No hiding place here will hold." Colt glared. "You want to take her away?" "I want her alive," the warrior answered. The woman felt her breath catch. No one had ever spoken on her behalf like that. Not with strength. Not with conviction. Reeve wiped the sweat from his brow despite the cold. "He's right, Colt. Rennick's men won't search politely. They'll tear through every board." Colt turned to his sister. "If you leave, there's no coming back. You understand? You won't be part of this house again." His voice wasn't cruel this time. It was wounded. It was the sound of a man realizing the cost of his own actions. She met his gaze, her heart nearly breaking. "You already sent me away the moment you sold me." Colt winced, just barely. The Apache warrior remained steady beside her, but he didn't touch her, didn't force her decision. He simply stood there, strong and certain, letting her choose her own path for the first time in her life. Reeve shifted uneasily. If she's going with him, they need distance before Rennick reaches the pass. Colt shook his head. "You'll start a war taking her." The warrior answered in a calm tone. "War began the moment you gave her to a cruel man." The words fell heavy, The woman breathed slowly, her fingers trembling as she held her shawl close. Her future, once pushed into darkness by her brother's choices, now stood at a crossroads. One path led to a ruthless traitor. The other into the unknown with a warrior whose name she didn't even know, yet whose presence felt like protection carved out of the land itself. But before she could speak, another sound cracked through the tension, a gunshot. Sharp, echoing, rolling across the valley, Reeves' horse reared. Colt spun toward the ridge. Ranch hands ducked instinctively, and the Apache warrior stepped in front of her without hesitation, shield-like, ready, through the distant haze. Shadows of riders appeared. Rennick's men had arrived sooner than anyone expected, pouring down the hillside like thunder, bringing the storm straight toward the ranch. And just like that, every choice she thought she had began to slip away as the danger grew louder, faster, and more deadly with each passing second. The riders coming down the ridge moved like a dark wave, the kind that told the land trouble was about to unfold. Dust poured behind them as they charged, and the sound of their hooves hammered through the valley. The woman felt her chest tighten as fear crawled under her skin. She had known danger was close, but not this close. Colt swore under his breath and reached for the rifle leaning against the porch rail. The Apache warrior stayed in front of her, broad shoulders steady, his gaze locked on the approaching men as if already counting the risks hidden inside their formation. Reeves stepped back, clearly shaken. "There are too many," he whispered. "I counted at least 10 on the way. Maybe more behind them." Colt clenched his teeth so hard the muscle in his jaw pulsed. "They won't step foot on my land without a fight?" The warrior gave him a sharp look, not of challenge but warning. "Fighting on your land will end in loss?" They came prepared. Colt bristled but didn't argue. A rare moment of fear flickered through his eyes. He wasn't a coward, but even he knew what it meant when Rennick arrived with a full force. The woman's pulse beat wildly. She felt the weight of everything bearing down on her brother's choices. Rennick's cruelty, the warrior's unexpected protection. She didn't know how all this had become her burden, but she felt trapped between forces larger than she could control. The riders slowed when they hit the open field in front of the ranch. Their formation spread out like a fan, blocking any escape route. The man in the center Rennick wore, a heavy coat that brushed against the sides of his saddle. His hat sat low, shadowing his eyes, but no shadow could hide the way he carried authority. Cold and sharp, he stopped his horse several yards from the ranch, raising a hand to halt his men. The silence that followed cut through the cold air. Sharp enough to sting. Colt stepped forward, rifle in hand, chin lifted with forced defiance. The warrior stayed right beside the woman, refusing to give ground. Reeve remained off to the side, torn between wanting to help and wanting to live. Rennick finally spoke. His voice held that dangerous calm that warned of worse storms beneath it. "Mighty nice land you've got here, Colt. Shame it's about to suffer on account of your broken deal." Colt shouted back, "You're trespassing. Turn your men around and leave." Rennick laughed softly, a laugh that carried no humor. "You made an agreement. You owe me, and I'm here to collect." His eyes shifted toward the woman. Even from a distance, she felt the weight of that stare. She took a step back instinctively, bumping against the strong presence of the Apache warrior behind her. Rennick nodded at her with a smug tilt of his chin. "She's coming with me. You know that?" Colt lifted the rifle a little. "You're not taking her." Rennick's smile thinned. "Then you should have kept your word instead of letting fear make you hide her." The Apache warrior spoke at last, his voice clear and steady. "She is not yours to take." Rennick raised a brow. "Ah, you must be the reason Colt didn't deliver her. Didn't expect him to get help from an Apache?" There was no insult in his tone, only calculation. He studied the warrior as if measuring his worth, weighing what kind of threat he might pose. The warrior remained still, but the air around him felt charged. Rennick turned back to Colt. "You owe me double now. If I don't walk away with her, I walk away with everything you own." Colt's grip on his rifle tightened. His pride battled his fear, and both showed in his hardened stare. "She isn't payment." Rennick shrugged. "Then the ranch is." A quiet gasp escaped her lips. She looked at Colt, seeing something raw in his eyes. He was a harsh man, stubborn, sometimes cruel in his decisions, but the ranch meant everything to him. It was their family's last piece of legacy. Losing it would cut him deeper than anything. The warrior leaned slightly toward her and spoke low enough for only her to hear. "This land will be burned if he fights. You need to move away from here now." Her breath trembled. "Where can we go?" "Anywhere he cannot reach." "That is not here." Reeve quietly stepped toward them, whispering, "There's a canyon path behind the storage sheds. Narrow enough that horses can't ride hard. Might give you a head start if you take it." Colt overheard and spun toward Reeve. "She's not running." Reeve stared at him. "If she stays, you lose her or the ranch." "Maybe both." Colt's voice cracked, revealing the truth he'd been hiding beneath all his hardness. "I can't let him take her. I can't." For the first time, she saw regret in his eyes. Deep regret. Pain he never spoke of. Pain he tried to bury under anger. The warrior didn't soften. "Your choices put her here, and now your fear keeps her trapped. If she stays, she dies under this man's control." Rennick's voice cut across the yard. "Enough talk. Bring her out." He gestured with his hand, and his men began to advance. Colt lifted the rifle fully, aiming at them. "One more step and I shoot." Rennick smirked and didn't slow. "You don't have enough bullets." The warrior stepped forward, placing himself between the gun barrel and the woman, shielding her from the growing danger. His stance alone warned Rennick's men not to cross him lightly. Colt's hands shook. Not from fear of Rennick, but from fear of losing control of everything he tried so hard to hold together. His anger burned him from the inside, mixing with guilt until he could barely think straight. The woman touched his arm gently. "Colt," she whispered, "you don't have to lose everything." He shook his head. "I already did when I made that deal." Her heart squeezed. For all his roughness, Colt had been the one trying to keep the ranch alive after their parents passed. He was only a man who didn't know how to carry grief without turning it into iron. Rennick's men continued advancing. Their shadows grew long across the frozen ground. Reeve whispered urgently, "If you're leaving, now is the time." The warrior stepped closer to her. "We go," he said quietly, but Colt moved between them, blocking the warrior with his arm. "You think you can take her and walk away?" He snapped. "You're dragging her into a worse fight." The warrior's voice remained calm. "Keeping her here is death." Rennick raised his hand again, signaling his men to spread out. They began circling the house, forming a tightening ring around the ranch. Fear crawled deeper in her chest. The ranch hands backed away, outnumbered and aware they couldn't stand against this force. The warrior grabbed the reins of his horse and held his hand toward her, letting her choose. His palm was steady, warm, certain. Her brother looked at her one last time. And in that moment, she finally understood he wasn't angry at her. He was angry at himself. Angry that he'd trapped her. Angry that he couldn't undo the deal. "Go," Colt said, barely audible. "Before it's too late." She felt her throat tighten as her eyes stung, but she stepped toward the warrior's offered hand. Rennick's shout split the air. "No one leaves!" The warrior lifted her onto the horse with a single strong motion. Reeve ran to open the side gate toward the canyon. Rennick pointed and yelled, "Stop them!" His men charged forward, reaching for weapons. Kicking their horses into pursuit, the warrior climbed up behind her, wrapping one arm firmly around her waist to keep her steady. His other hand pulled the reins hard, sending the horse bolting toward the canyon trail. Colt fired a shot to slow. Rennick's men, Reeve swung. The gate wide, the horse lunged through it. Rennick's men stormed. After them, the wind tore at her hair as the warrior shouted, "Hold on." The canyon narrowed ahead of them like a throat ready to swallow them whole. Behind them, the thunder of pursuit grew louder, closer, more relentless, as she realized running was only the beginning of the danger. Waiting for them, the canyon walls rose around them like giant hands. Rough stone pressing in on both sides as the horse lunged forward. The woman held tighter to the Apache warrior, feeling the raw force of his strength as he guided them through the narrow trail. The sound of hoofbeats behind them cracked through the air, louder and closer with every passing second. Rennick's men were pushing hard, and the canyon echoed their pursuit until it felt like the whole earth vibrated with danger. Cold wind whipped against her face, stinging her eyes, but she refused to close them. She had spent too long letting fear blind her. Now she forced herself to face every second, every breath, every threat riding behind them. The warrior leaned low, urging the horse onward, his voice a steady whisper in her ear, grounding her. "Stay close," he said. "Do not fear the sound. Fear only stopping." She nodded, though her heart pounded like it wanted to break free from her ribs. The canyon path turned sharply, revealing steep drops where loose rocks tumbled into deep shadows. One wrong step would send them falling. The warrior's control over the horse felt almost impossible, yet every movement he made showed his certainty. He knew these lands better than anyone chasing them. Still, she sensed the weight on him protecting her meant choosing paths that slowed him, choosing danger he would never take alone. A sudden crack echoed through the canyon. A gunshot. A spray of stone dust burst off the canyon wall beside them. She flinched, grabbing tighter. "They're shooting," she whispered, terror catching in her breath. "They try to scare us," the warrior said. "But fear is not a weapon if you do not give it strength." Another shot rang out. This one closer. Too close. The horse stumbled from the noise, nearly missing a foothold. The warrior muttered something in his native tongue, soothing the animal as he steadied it with impressive control. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, strong and deliberate, as if refusing to falter even under fire. Behind them, the canyon widened just enough for Rennick's riders to spread out. Shouts echoed, mixing with the pounding rhythm of hooves. She looked over her shoulder and spotted them, dark figures weaving through the canyon's sharp turns. Some brandishing rifles. Rennick himself wasn't riding in the front. He stayed behind his men, as he always did, letting others take the risk while he waited for victory to be brought to him. That alone fueled a flicker of anger in her chest. A man who led from safety could never break. Someone who chose their own freedom. The warrior noticed her attention shifting backward. "Do not look at them," he told her. "Look ahead. The land listens to those who trust it." She forced her gaze forward, but the path wasn't easy. The canyon narrowed again, then opened into a fork. Two ways, one headed toward the open plains, one deeper into the mountain shadows. The warrior pulled the reins, making a split-second choice. He turned toward the shadowed path. The horse surged into the dimness where sunlight barely reached. The cold grew sharper, the ground more uneven. She felt the horse's breath harder against her legs. The trail was risky, but she knew the warrior chose it because no one else would. The narrower the path, the fewer men could chase them shoulder to shoulder. The echoes behind them confirmed it. Some riders slowed, their horses too nervous to follow. But a handful kept coming, their shouts bouncing off the canyon walls. The warrior guided the horse around another bend. "Not far," he murmured. "There is a rise ahead. From there we see everything." But before they could reach it, the canyon walls pressed too tight for two riders to pass side by side. The warrior slowed, guiding the horse through the tightest part carefully. Hoofbeats thundered behind them again. The pursuers were catching up faster. "We need to move," she whispered. "I know," he said calmly. "But if we rush here, we fall?" Another gunshot rang out, pinging off the rock above them. Small pebbles rained down. She gasped, instinctively leaning toward the warrior for shelter. He shifted, almost curving around her, protecting her with his own body as he steered them forward. The canyon finally widened, and the warrior kicked the horse into a faster run. They burst out onto a raised stretch of land that looked out over rolling hills and thick forests below. Wind swept across the ridge, carrying the smell of pine and snow. He slowed for just a breath, letting the horse recover as he surveyed the land. He was studying not just escape, but advantage. She could sense it. His mind was reading the terrain the way others read books, but the moment of quiet shattered when the pursuing riders appeared at the mouth of the narrow stretch. They spotted the pair instantly. One of them fired another shot. This time, the bullet struck close enough that she felt the vibration through the horse's flank. The warrior turned the horse sharply toward the downhill path. "They follow," he warned. "But the land favors those who ride with purpose." They descended the ridge, weaving between jutting rocks and clusters of tough grass. The slope was steep, but the warrior handled it with skill born of deep understanding. The horse responded to him like it trusted no one else. As they moved, she asked quietly, "Why are you doing this?" He didn't hesitate. "Because your life was not meant to be sold." "But you hardly know me." He kept his eyes on the trail. "Knowing your past is not needed to know your worth." Her throat tightened. No one in her life had ever spoken to her that way. Not even her family. The descent led them toward a cluster of thick trees. The forest offered cover, but also danger if they were trapped inside. The warrior slowed when they reached the first row of pines. He listened, eyes alert, posture sharp. "They will not stop," he said. "But here we choose ground they do not know." Branches creaked overhead. Cold air settled around them. The forest was both shield and threat, and she knew it. They rode deeper into the shadows, weaving between trees. The hoofbeats behind them grew dimmer, then louder again. Rennick's men had reached the ridge and were spreading out, searching for movement among the trees. She could see their silhouettes through the branches, now dark shapes moving like wolves hunting prey. The warrior guided the horse into a thicket where the brush grew tall. "We go on foot from here," he said. Her breath hitched. "On foot? With them behind us?" He nodded. "They follow the horse's track. But we do not stay on it." He swung down smoothly and helped her off. The ground was cold under her boots. The horse snorted softly, sensing the tension. The warrior placed his hand gently against the horse's neck. "Go," he whispered, sending the animal forward into the brush. The horse obeyed, trotting away, its tracks leading deeper into the forest. The woman looked around nervously. "Where do we go?" "Up," he said, pointing to a rocky incline covered partly in fallen leaves and roots. They climbed quickly but quietly. Her hands shook as she grabbed roots, her shawl snagging on branches. The warrior stayed close behind her, guiding her where the ground was loose. Voices echoed in the forest below them. "They can't be far. Find them." Rennick's men were spreading out, following the horse's trail. She pressed her back against the cold stone as the warrior crouched near her, watching the shadows move below through breaks in the branches. His breathing was steady, his presence unshaken. He looked carved from the land itself, solid and unbreakable. After a moment he whispered, "We move higher." They ascended until they reached a narrow ledge overlooking the forest. From here, she could see the pursuers moving in clusters, scanning the ground and shouting orders. She could even see Rennick down below, sitting on his horse, macarking commands. Furious, he had lost sight of them. The warrior studied every spot, every movement, every opportunity. The tension grew silently between them, thick and unsettling. She could feel the weight of danger pressing from all sides, and yet something else stirred within her. Something she didn't expect on that ledge. With danger closing in and the warrior steady beside her, she felt a spark of trust unlike anything she had known before. It was fragile yet powerful, like the first flame in a long dark night. But before she could make sense of it, the sound of branches snapping below jolted her. Men had found the horse's tracks turning. Away, and now they were heading straight toward the incline they had climbed. They were coming closer, too. Close, the warrior rose to his full height, his jaw set with fierce determination. "No more running," he said quietly. "The fight chooses us now." And as the shadows of Rennick's men drew nearer, the forest held its breath, waiting for the moment everything would collide. The warrior stood on the ledge like the mountain itself had carved him there, steady and unbending, his eyes locked on the shifting shadows below. The woman pressed her back to the cool stone, her breath shallow as she listened to the voices of Rennick's men growing louder. The forest air felt thick, holding both danger and something deeper, as if the land waited to see which way fate would tilt. The warrior glanced at her just once, his gaze warm but determined, then turned his attention back to the forest floor. "They climb," he whispered. She felt her pulse quicken. She could hear the heavy steps of boots on roots and loose rock. Rennick's men fanned out, spreading like a dark net across the forest. The warrior moved closer to her, positioning himself between her and the danger. She didn't feel small beside him. She felt protected in a way she had never known. As the first rider dismounted below to climb, a sudden crack of movement echoed from the far side of the forest. More riders appeared in the distance, but these were not Rennick's men. Their silhouettes carried different shapes, different colors, and the moment she recognized the feathered adornments and painted shields, her heart leapt. The Apache, not an army, but a group of warriors she had seen only briefly before in the valley. Men loyal to the one standing beside her. They moved with silent purpose, spreading through the trees like shadows that knew the land far better than any outsider. The warrior beside her saw them too, and though his expression stayed composed, she felt his breath shift ever so slightly. A quiet strength settled deeper in him. He had not called for them, but they had come. Not for battle, but for him. Rennick's men halted at the sight of the approaching group. Some drew their weapons, uncertain whether to fight or retreat. The forest buzzed with tension as the Apache warriors stepped into view, their presence firm but not aggressive, their eyes taking measure of the chaos unfolding. The warrior beside her called down to them in his native tongue, his voice calm and confident. The Apache warriors responded, positioning themselves in a wide arc that blocked Rennick's men from advancing further up the incline. They didn't threaten. They simply stood tall as if the land itself had risen to say enough. Rennick rode forward, his face tight with anger and frustration. "This isn't your fight," he shouted. One of the Apache elders stepped forward. The lines on his face traced decades of wisdom and storms weathered. His voice was low but carried power. "You ride into our lands and chase a woman who seeks freedom. That makes it our concern." Rennick scowled. She was promised. A deal was made. The elder shook his head. "A life cannot be traded like grain. A woman chooses where she stands." Rennick's jaw tightened. He gestured impatiently at his men. "We outnumber them." A few of his riders shifted nervously. It was clear they didn't want to fight here, not with men who knew every rock and tree root by memory. Even the horses sensed the tension, stamping and tossing their heads. Then the warrior who had been climbing the incline spotted the woman and pointed. "There, she's up there." Rennick snapped his attention toward the ledge. His eyes burned with ugly determination. He began moving forward again, ready to push the confrontation even deeper, but the Apache warrior beside her stepped out from the ledge's shadow, his posture strong and his presence unmistakable. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't shout. He simply stood with a confidence that made the forest seem to draw breath around him. "You chase only one person," he said. "But she is not yours to claim." Rennick glared. "You think standing there stops me?" "You stand alone," the warrior replied. "Your men doubt this fight. They ride for coin, not loyalty. Ask them if they wish to bleed for your pride." A murmur spread through Rennick's group. He turned, expecting their unwavering obedience, but saw hesitation instead. Some of his men lowered their weapons, uneasy. Others leaned back in their saddles, eyeing the Apache warriors with caution. A few looked at Rennick with clear disappointment, their patience wearing thin. Rennick growled, furious at the shift he couldn't control. He snapped at them. "Cowards. Every one of you." But even that couldn't force loyalty where none existed. One rider finally spoke, shaking his head. "We didn't sign up to fight a tribe for your mistakes." "Let it go, Rennick." Another nodded. "This isn't worth it." One by one, riders backed away, turning their horses toward the ridge. Rennick stared in disbelief as the men he counted on rode off, leaving him nearly alone. He spun toward the Apache warriors, anger pulsing through him, but the elder stepped forward once more. "Choose another path," he warned. "Leave with what remains of your pride." Rennick's hands trembled with rage, but he wasn't foolish enough to attack an entire band of Apache warriors. He spat the dust at his feet, shot one last venomous look at the woman and the warrior standing with her, then jerked his reins. His horse bolted in retreat, disappearing into the trees with what few loyal riders remained. The forest fell silent again. But this time it was a peaceful silence, a release of breath held too long. The woman sagged against the stone in relief. The warrior stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder. His touch was gentle, grounding her. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the safety wash over her when she opened them. Some of the Apache warriors had climbed the incline to greet their brother. Their expressions were warm, their respect clear. She watched as they spoke with him quietly, acknowledging his choice to protect her with admiration rather than judgment. The elder approached her, his eyes kind. "You are safe now," he said. "But the land ahead changes shape when choices change hearts." She nodded slowly. "I know. You will ride with us," he continued, "until you choose where your future rests." She glanced at the warrior, who watched her with a quiet question in his gaze. He wasn't assuming anything. He wasn't claiming her like some possession. He was waiting, fully giving her the freedom others had tried to steal from her. She stepped toward him. "Where do you think I belong?" The warrior held her gaze with a warmth that eased the last knots of fear inside her. "Where your spirit feels light," he said. "Not trapped, not owned, only free." Her heart swelled. "Then I want to stay with you, if you will have me." His answer came not in grand words, but in the way his eyes softened and he extended his hand to her, steady and sure. When she placed her hand in his, he lifted it gently, as though honoring something sacred. The journey back to the valley was slow but calm. The Apache riders guided them through safer paths, watching the land with practiced eyes. By the time they emerged near the open fields, the sun had lowered, casting warm gold across the hills. Colt stood waiting near the edge of the fields, his tired posture revealing long hours of regret. When she approached, he didn't speak right away. He looked at her, truly looked, and in his eyes she saw remorse. Love buried under years of hardship, and a man realizing he almost lost the only family he had left. "I was wrong," Colt finally said, voice rough. "I thought I was saving the ranch. But I was losing you?" She stepped closer, letting her voice soften but remain firm. "You can start over. You still have time to make things right." He nodded, swallowing hard. "If you choose a different life now, I won't stop you. I won't decide anything for you again." The warrior stood quietly beside her, not interfering. She reached out and touched Colt's arm. "I forgive you, but I need a new start." Colt lowered his head in acceptance. "Then I hope you find something better than what I gave you." She smiled faintly. "I already did." The warrior offered Colt a respectful nod, acknowledging the difficult path he walked. Colt nodded back, humbled. When she turned to leave with the warrior, the sun bathed the valley in its last warm glow. The air felt lighter, carrying the promise of a life built not from fear, but from choice and hope. She climbed onto the warrior's horse, settling in behind him. His presence felt like a promise, steady, warm, and true. As they rode toward the Apache homeland, the wind carried the final remnants of danger away, leaving only a horizon full of new beginnings. And for the first time in her life, she felt the world open before her, as if the land itself whispered that she finally belonged exactly where her heart had chosen to rest.